Hey, good morning, everybody. Merry Christmas to you. It's Christmas morning, and we had a white Christmas yesterday. It snowed a little bit. That's wonderful. Um, Got my oldest daughter down from Madison with her fiance. We had just opened up our gifts. It was a good morning. It's a good morning. Anyway, finished reading The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis, and I grew up hearing about this guy, C.S. Lewis, but I've never read anything by him until just now. Of course, we all know the Chronicles of Narnia and that whole series when the movies came out. But I always thought he was a pastor. I don't know why, maybe because the guys in my church would talk about him for his religious writings, but he wrote other books that were non-religious in nature, like The Abolition of Man. Now, from what I understand, when he was working at Cambridge University, he received a book, an English book, called The Green Book, and he really didn't like the way that it was written. So, in part, this is a response to his editing or his review regarding that school book for children. And he really took issue with the fact that let me just say that this book is divided into three sections, and the first one is called Men Without Chests. And so he takes issues with the two writers of the Green Book, and he really doesn't like the fact that he's teaching these kids, not he is, but the teachers are teaching those kids that when you write, it's not the best idea to talk about emotions, because a lot of times when you picking words, it might be more what you're feeling as to opposed to what the actual situation is. So the writers of the Green Book are telling kids that they should really reconsider the emotional involvement that they have in their writing. And that's something C.S. Lewis didn't really like. His response to it is quite hard. He says that that's just foolishness, that these teachers, they really are changing our students by telling them not to be emotionally attached to their writing or even the things about life, because C.S. Lewis took the perspective that not only are you teaching these kids to look at their writing differently, that they could even be interpreting life in that same way, and we need to have people that are emotionally attached to the good things in the world. And he goes into that in a little bit more detail. I'm not going to get into it. I just want to say that this is a really good book to read, because it explores, the role of teachers, or the teacher should have upon their students, and the seriousness at which teachers should, take their work, take their life's ambition when they're teaching young students. That you might be saying something kind of off the cuff in class or in a book, and C.S. Lewis is getting, hopefully getting people to rethink that you should really be deliberate about the way you teach kids. So on one level, at least through the first chapter or the first section, he's as I said, he's talking about how students need to interact with students. He is a deep thinker. He is a deep writer, and it really wasn't an easy book to get through. It's only like 90 pages. It took me an hour and a half or so to read it the first time. But the second time I read it, I really had to slow down and really digest what he's saying, because it is pretty serious. He says it in a way that is different, and he says it in a way that really makes you consider the depth of which this topic that he's dealing with. Anyway, the second section transfers into what he says is the way. He entitles it The Way. So he takes the first section is kind of like a practical teaching or a practical discussion about teaching, and then the second section is certainly philosophical. He's talking about traditional values, and I got to be honest, I've always heard that term, traditional values, but I never sat down and thought about what is a traditional value and how to the people who say that traditional values are traditional, how do they arrive at that decision? And C.S. Lewis in that section kind of goes through that. He talks about the importance of traditional values, and he says, well, if we're going to have a reset of our value system, or we're going to change from quote-unquote traditional values into something more progressive, he goes, what is that going to be, and what does that mean? And I think that's a good conversation to have. His point of view is that if you're taking away traditional value, then you're putting in something that isn't grounded by or tested by time and by great thinkers across the world. Thankfully, at the very end of this book, he references and quotes where he believes traditional values come from. And it isn't just a Western idea. He doesn't just quote Eastern teachings or whatever. He quotes from different people around the world in ancient times. He quotes from Egyptians' writings, Middle Eastern writings. There is some European writings that he quotes from, but his point is to show that when you think of traditional values, it's a universal value system. And that's the way I would coin it, not necessarily a traditional value system, but a universal traditional system for values. Okay, for instance, courage would be considered a traditional value, or protecting the innocent and protecting the weak. That's another traditional value that he talks about. So if you've never really considered what a traditional value is or how you define it, I think C.S. Lewis challenges you, and he challenges me certainly, to sit down and think about that. And finally, he transitions into the third section, which is called the Abolition of Man, which is what the book is titled after. Abolition meaning the end or the finality. Some other synonyms are annihilation and destruction. So it's kind of an ominous ending to his book. However, it's kind of futuristic because he talks about where science is headed, and he gives his ideas and perspectives about how we should think about where science is going. And interestingly enough, he talks about genetics to a certain extent and eugenics. And those are big discussions we're having right now. I think just in the last couple of months, the first embryo was created using the DNA from 3 different parents. And he kind of talks about that. He goes, if we're going to dissect humanity or humans into just DNA molecules, and we're deciding what's good and what's bad, what we want to keep with a future child or what we don't want to keep, he goes, we're kind of taking away the mystery and taking away the creativity of the process and dynamics of evolution, of life itself, And again, I think those are some pretty pertinent topics to think about today. And again, I'm not doing this book justice. He taught at Oxford for many years, and then he moved on to Cambridge. I mean, he's a deep thinker, but this is a really good book, and I hope you pick it up, and I hope you get into it, and I hope you like it.